Today, we are going to review the heartbreaking case of Joe Arridy, a man from Colorado that was manipulated by police to make a false confession and was ultimately executed. Welcome to our channel, where we talk all things true crime. This video is for educational purposes based on public knowledge. Let's get started. Joe Arridy was born on April 29, 1915 in Pueblo, Colorado. He was the oldest of 3 children. From an early age, it was evident that Joe had cognitive disabilities. Joe struggled with basic tasks and had difficulty communicating effectively. His intellectual disability meant that he had limited understanding of the world around him. Joe had only spent 1 year in school when the principal told Joe's parents to keep him home, telling them he could not learn. Joe didn't have any friends and would spend his time wandering around the neighborhood. He liked to hammer nails and make mud pies. In 1925, when Joe was 10, he was sent to the State Home and Training School for Mental Defectives in Grand Junction, Colorado. When Joe was at the state home, an examiner went to the Arridy's home and gave them multiple psychological tests. The examiner said that Joe's mother, Mary, was probably feeble-minded, and his younger brother, George, was a quote-unquote high moron. Joe's father regretted sending Joe to the state home and requested a full release. Joe returned home on August 13, 1926.
On September 17, 1929, Joe was essayed by a group of teen boys. Joe's juvenile probation officer had walked onto the scene. The probation officer complained to the school's superintendent, Dr. Benjamin Jefferson. It's unknown if the assailants were punished at all. Because of the incident, Joe was sent back to the state home. Joe was only capable of short tasks such as mopping and washing dishes. Joe was often mistreated and manipulated by his peers. The only friend Joe had was a kitchen worker, Miss Bowers. She supervised his chores during the 7 years he was there. Dr. Jefferson made note of Joe's suggestibility and he needed constant guidance. Joe's family tried to get him discharged, but they were blocked by Dr. Jefferson.
In early August of 1936, Joe, now 21, snuck out of the state home with 4 other young men. The young men were mimicking the behavior of the train-hopping workers in the nearby rail yards. Joe ended up stowed away in the freight cars. Joe traveled through Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming for several weeks. Joe ended up in Cheyenne, Wyoming on August 20th. Lost and confused, Joe walked up to a kitchen car and asked for food. A couple running the car allowed Joe to stay with them, giving him clean clothes and food. Joe washed dishes for meals. On August 26th, the kitchen's car train was headed out of state, and since Joe wasn't an employee, he couldn't go. The couple drove Joe back to the rail yard in Cheyenne.
The night of August 26, Joe was arrested for vagrancy after being caught wandering around the rail yards. Joe was brought to the local jail and was questioned by the county sheriff, George Carroll. Carroll was aware that there was a widespread search for a suspect in a murder case in Pueblo. The murder had happened on August 14th when 2 girls were attacked while they were sleeping. The sisters were 15-year-old Dorothy and 12-year-old Barbara Drain. They were attacked with a bladed weapon, most likely a hatchet. Dorothy was also essayed. Sadly, Dorothy passed away from her injuries, but her sister Barbara survived. Once Carroll learned that Joe had traveled through the area, he began questioning Joe about the crimes. Carroll said that Joe confessed to him. Carroll contacted the Pueblo police and local press, naming Joe as the only suspect in the attacks.
The Pueblo Police Chief Grady informed Carroll that he already had a man under arrest for the murder. The man was 33-year-old Frank Aguilar, who was a laborer with the Works Progress Administration from Mexico. Aguilar worked for the Drains girls' father and was shortly fired before the attack. When the police searched the place Aguilar was staying at, they found an axe that had some marks on it that would match the injuries of the girls. Aguilar was already suspected of murdering a 72-year-old and attempting to kill her 48-year-old niece. Aguilar was arrested on August 16th after he attended Dorothy's funeral. He had cut in line twice to view the casket, and then he forcefully handed Dorothy's father a handful of nickels to help the family. While in custody, Aguilar didn't admit to the attack, and his mother gave an alibi that he was home the night of the attacks. Aguilar only became a suspect after analyzing the scrapings under his nails. There were blue dyed fabrics, which were the same material as the girls' bed sheets.
During the time, Sheriff Carroll said Joe had changed his story while being transported to Pueblo. On August 27th, there was a reenactment of the attack at the Drains home. Joe reportedly confessed again and had told Carroll he had been with a man named Frank. Joe changed several details of his confession. Initially, Joe said he had used a club in the attack. Other parts were left out altogether. Joe also said that he went home after the attack to hide out. However, Joe repeatedly gave the wrong addresses. On August 28th, Aguilar confessed to the murder of Dorothy. He was sent to Colorado State Penitentiary, and Carol had set up a meeting for Joe to meet with Aguilar. At first, Aguilar said he had never seen or met Joe. On September 2nd, Aguilar claimed that Joe was his accomplice.
Aguilar did recant the claim that Joe was his accomplice, stating that Grady had threatened him with terrible things if he didn't implicate Joe. Aguilar was convicted of the essay and murder of Dorothy and was sentenced to death on December 22nd of the same year. Aguilar was executed on August 13th, 1937. His mother came to see him and collapsed at her final visit with her son and died in the prison infirmary. A male spectator died of a heart attack during the execution. Joe went to trial on February 8, 1937, and his lawyer pleaded insanity to avoid the death penalty. Sheriff Carroll testified in court that Joe was mentally fit, articulate during questioning, and provided accurate information of the crimes.
3 state psychiatrists testified that Joe had a low IQ of 46 in the mind of a 6-year-old, that he was incapable of distinguishing between right and wrong, and therefore would be unable to perform any action with a criminal intent. His lawyer tried to show Joe's mental development by asking questions that were related to the case, but also common household knowledge. Joe didn't know what a hatchet looked like, or could tell the difference between a dime and a nickel. Joe didn't recognize his own father, who he hadn't seen in 8 years, due to being housed at the state home. Joe didn't know who Dorothy or Frank was. This was the first time Joe was asked by somebody else besides the police.
Joe was convicted on April 17th, mostly due to his false confession. There was supposedly hair that matched with Joe's. The hair was American Indian, and Joe had Syrian ancestry. Visually matching hairs has since been proven to not be accurate. Dorothy's sister Barbara testified that Aguilar was the only one who had attacked her and her sister. Barbara also testified that Joe was not there and she had never seen him. Despite all of the evidence showing that Joe was innocent, he was still sentenced to death. Joe Arridy, an attorney that was later elected and served as the Colorado Attorney General, became involved in Joe's defense counsel after his sentencing. Arridy was able to delay Joe's execution multiple times, but was unable to get the conviction overturned. Arridy noted that Aguilar said he acted alone, and there were many medical experts that testified to Joe's mental limitations. Arridy said Joe didn't even understand the meaning of execution. Arridy argued to the Colorado Supreme Court that if Joe was executed, it would take a long time for the state of Colorado to live down the disgrace.
While Joe was held on death row, during the appeals he often played with a toy train that he had gotten for Christmas in 1938. His prison warden, Roy Bess, had given it to him. Bess said that Joe was the happiest prisoner on death row. Joe was liked and treated well by both the guards and other prisoners. Bess had become one of Joe's supporters and joined the efforts to save his life. Bess said he cared for Joe like a son and would often bring him gifts such as toys, crayons, and picture books. Bess said before Joe's execution, he probably didn't even know he was about to die. All he did was happily sit and play with the toy train I had given him.
While Joe was in prison, his father had died, and Joe wasn't able to go to the funeral. He hadn't seen his mother since being incarcerated. On the morning of Joe's execution, January 6, 1939, Bess had arranged a surprise visit with Joe's family. It was noted that Joe wasn't emotional, and when his mother was crying and hugging him, he didn't reciprocate. Joe stayed silent through the visit and remained expressionless. When Joe was questioned about the execution, he didn't understand the meaning of the gas chamber and told the warden, No, Joe won't die." Before he went to his execution, Joe went to each cell and shook hands with every inmate to say goodbye. For his last meal, Joe had requested a bowl of ice cream to be refrigerated so he could eat it later. He did not understand that he was not coming back. Joe became upset when he was told he couldn't take his toy train with him. Joe ended up giving it to another prisoner.
On the way to the gas chamber, Roy Bess walked with Joe, and when they passed the prison chicken coop, Bess had asked Joe if he would still raise the chickens in heaven, since Joe showed an interest in the hens. Joe said he wanted to play the harp. It was noted that Joe was smiling when he went into the gas chamber, and his smile faded briefly when he was blindfolded. Joe calmed down when the warden held his hand and reassured him. Bess was noted to be crying during the execution and pleading with the governor of Colorado to commute Joe's sentence. The governor refused to pardon or commute his sentence.
It is now unconstitutional for people who are mentally disabled to receive capital punishment. In 2007, a nonprofit organization called Friends of Joe Arridy worked to bring new recognition to the injustice of this case and to get a tombstone for his grave. Attorney David A. Martinez became involved in Joe's case, and with the help of the Friends, he prepared a 400-page petition for pardon from the governor. The governor gave Joe a full pardon in 2011, saying, "Pardoning Joe Arridy cannot undo this tragic event in Colorado history. It is in the interests of justice and simple decency, however, to restore his good name."
Travesty of justice all the way around. Not only was Joe factually innocent, he was also incapable, really, of defending himself in a court of law, and hopefully we've done better over the years in both those places, but in looking at this, it was really apparent that what had happened to Joe was an awful, awful tragedy of justice. I appreciate the honor in a very significant way. I also tell you that I had a legal team that deserves a great deal of credit here, and certainly all of the other people who were involved in ensuring that justice came for Joe.
Have y'all heard of this incredibly heartbreaking story before? We're glad that laws have changed since then. Let us know what you think in the comments below.